So thank you guys for letting me talk about the subject of twice exceptional. As David mentioned, it's near and dear to my heart. And if I tear up, so I have an almost 18-year-old son who sadly I learned was twice exceptional when he was about 17. So it's been a long journey. I've known he was different since he was 2. And I've been searching for him for about 16 years to try to find the help that he needed. He was identified as gifted when he was 7, and then diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety when he was 11. And like I said, it wasn't until about a year ago that there was a term on the neuropsychologist report, twice exceptional, that was just there. It wasn't pointed out to me or highlighted for me by the neuropsychologist, but it was there. And around December, for whatever reason, I dove deeply into that field and that term, just, what is this? And it's once I finally dove into that term, did I finally understand the journey that we had been on, the challenging journey that we have been on and continue to be on. And I don't know what any of you might know about it or not know about it, but my hope tonight is to share with you what I have learned in diving into learning about the field and what I have discovered, so that at a minimum, you'll be able to recognize it. You'll be able to know why it's important to recognize it, and you'll know in part how to help. So I'd like to dedicate this presentation to the many kids, including my son, who are twice exceptional. May they always remember this powerful quote by C.S. Lewis, that you can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. Go on with the show. So what comes to mind before we dive into the term twice exceptional? I thought it would be good to take a look at what does the term exceptional mean? And so what comes to mind when you hear the word exceptional? Well, I go where every person goes when I'm wondering that, the dictionary. And so Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines exceptional as forming an exception or rare, better than average, superior, above or below average, deviating from the norm, and physically disabled. Merriam-Webster also provided some synonyms for the word exceptional: extraordinary, phenomenal, exceeding, unusual. But interestingly enough, some of these synonyms are also for exceptional: atypical, aberrant, peculiar, abnormal. And so what I found to be interesting in looking at the term exceptional itself was that there was an inherent duality that came along with the term exceptional. And so one might expect that when you hear the term twice exceptional, that this duality would be included. And in fact, it is. In 2014, an operational definition of twice exceptional was published in the Gifted Child Quarterly, and it defined twice exceptional learners as students who demonstrate the potential for high achievement or creative productivity in one or more domains, and who manifest one or more disabilities as defined by federal or state eligibility criteria. So there you have it. To be twice exceptional, a person must demonstrate characteristics of both giftedness and one or more disabilities. So we have the definition of twice exceptional, but what might it actually look like? Well, to understand this, twice exceptional experts tend to use the terms strengths and challenges when defining and looking at what the characteristics of these twice exceptional students are. And so first up, let's take a look at the strengths. So someone who is twice exceptional may have many of these strengths. It's what gives them their power, but it can also involve some intensities. It can involve some asynchronies. And so while a kid might have a superior vocabulary and understand something at the 8th grade level, they may only be 7. They may be able to read and comprehend and have conversations that make them seem as if they're in their teens, but social emotionally, they're still a 7 or 8-year-old. These kids are great at understanding the big picture. They're great at being resourceful. Their intensities manifest themselves sometimes in their incredible creativity and imagination and in their energy. But those intensities can also come through in a high level of emotion as well. And so what I find is interesting is these TUI experts, instead of using the term giftedness, many times refer to strengths, because some of the characteristics of kids who are gifted can also be manifested as challenges. And so let's take a look at some of the challenges that these kids who are 2E might face. So I don't know about you, but when I was looking at all of the characteristics of kids with 2E, I was pretty overwhelmed when I put them all on one page, because there are a lot. And if you take a closer look, you might notice that many of these challenges don't just have to do with a disability itself, but they have to do with social-emotional development. Easily frustrated, low self-esteem, depression, difficulty relating to peers, fear bullying, can't read social cues. And so, like I was saying before, those many times come with the child who is gifted. And so when you add the giftedness and you add a disability, when those strengths meet those challenges of that 2E kid, it's almost like challenges on steroids. So when these mix, many times this 2E kid has these characteristics. I mentioned the asynchronous development, the intensities. They can also become manipulative. They can become opinionated. They are argumentative, inconsistent academic performance. It sounds like the kid at Brandeis, right? Lack of organization and study skills. And I think, when I look at this list, I have to wonder why. Why do they have so many challenges? Because they have so many strengths, in fact. And if they have the disability, one would think that they might have special education and receive services through special education on an IEP. They might have a 504. So why? Why do these kids have so many challenges? Well, unfortunately, I guess it's inevitable that some kids will fall through the cracks, right? I mean, no system is perfect, and our medical system, our mental health system, our educational systems, they're not perfect. And unfortunately, the 2E kids are many times the kids that fall through the cracks. But how do they fall through the cracks? Well, many times they aren't identified for the strengths and the challenges that they have. And Susan Baum, who is an expert in the field of 2E, and a team of her colleagues from a place called the Bridges Academy, which is it's both a school and a center for research and development that's out in California that focuses entirely on twice exceptional. Susan and a team of her colleagues developed a model that in part helps to explain how this lack of identification might happen. They asserted that while every 2E child has both giftedness and at least one disability, when the two mix, it creates an entirely new profile, one that's neither gifted nor is disabled or has a disability. You don't see necessarily the strengths, you don't see the challenges, but what you see is a profile that's green, and green is 2E. And so it's a great visual because it helps us to understand that a 2E student's profile doesn't fit the typical profile of a gifted student, nor does it fit the typical profile of a child with a disability. Instead, the profile's green. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, at least we can recognize one shade of green, right? But the problem is, in fact, that when you put together the multiple shades of yellow and giftedness and strengths that you see, and you put together the multiple shades of how a disability might present, and you mix them all together, you get this fabulous matrix of greens. And so the reality is, when you have so many different shades of green, it makes it all the more difficult to discern what a 2E child might look like. And as you all well know, when you can't discern the root of the challenges, it's hard to provide the proper services that they might need to support the child. So identification, while critical, remains one of the biggest challenges for this population of kids. Another way of looking at why it's so hard to identify 2E kids is something that David mentioned earlier. Their gifts may mask their disabilities, and their disabilities may mask their gifts. And generally, there are 3 ways in which this might happen. The first way is if the child is gifted and that is recognized, but their disability is not recognized. And many times this happens a lot in younger kids because their giftedness, their strengths allow them to compensate for their disabilities and their challenges. And so many times kids might, they might look at the kid as a typical gifted kid and have high expectations for what they can produce. And so when they can't produce, they're just looked at as lazy. The disability is not seen. And so they're not helped. That scaffolding is not provided. And so this 2E child who is perceived as gifted is labeled as lazy or unmotivated, or if they're older, just like every other teenager. The second way that it might present is if the disability is recognized, but the giftedness is not. And so there is this child who is identified as having a disability, is provided with accommodations or is provided with an IEP and special services. And this is where the asynchronous skills may come into play, because this kid might need remedial math or remedial instruction in reading, and yet they're comprehending at a much higher level. And so they kind of feel insulted. And they can disengage, they can become bored. So you might have the adults in their life saying, but you're getting all of this support. What's the problem? Why aren't you doing the work? And it's because they're like, oh, I have to do this again. And so this first, when the giftedness is recognized, when the disability is the only one that's recognized, a lot of times the kids are not being taught at their zone of proximal development, where it's like the just right challenge, where they're being, if the child is recognized as gifted, but is not scaffolded with their disability, a lot of times that zone of proximal development seems like they might be in an AP class, but they can't do the work. So they might not look like they're at that right zone of proximal development with the achievement that they can, and the production that they can show, that they can keep up with the work. If they were provided with that scaffolding, they'd fly. Right? And simultaneously, if the disability is the only thing that's recognized and the gifted is not, perhaps the kid's not allowed to be in that higher level course intellectually. And so that zone of proximal development is also missed. And then the third way is if neither the giftedness nor the disability are recognized, and they're just seen as doing well enough. They're seen as an average kid. And so yet again, they're not able to thrive and really fly with the strengths that they have. So unfortunately, the face of someone who is 2E many times becomes that of a person with multiple challenges, which in part, as Ross Green might say, is simply a result of lagging skills, unsolved problems, and maladaptive behaviors. But many times these kids know that they're not like other kids. They know that they need help, but they also don't know how to get the help that they need. And it manifests itself in these maladaptive behaviors across the board. And the longer that these kids go unnoticed and go without the help that they need, the more maladaptive that they can become, such that it can end up in these societal challenges where they have substance abuse problems, and where they become homeless as adults, or they get involved in criminal behavior. It's a real tragedy when it gets to that level. And ultimately, it's just not easy being green. And yet, there are many famous people who are known to have been or to be twice exceptional. And so, how do we get from maladaptive behaviors, unsolved problems, and debilitating challenges to successful contributors of society? Well, I wish I had an easy answer, But honestly, the solution is almost as complex as the kids themselves. But one thing that is consistent, no matter what TUI expert you consult, is, and David alluded to this earlier also, he could have done the presentation tonight, I think.
I don't think so. You did.
So how do we get there? How do we help these kids get from these maladaptive behaviors to these amazing contributors of society? Well, we have to remember the strengths, because those sometimes are what get lost in the shuffle. Because these kids have tremendous strengths, gifts, and talents. And our world is deficit focused. The mom chatter, right? I'm guilty of it just like anybody else. But we have to remember and celebrate the strengths of these kids. And I'm not saying that it's easy. There are expectations, there are deadlines, there are all kinds of reasons to focus on supporting their challenges. But with these TUI kids, if they're not recognized for their strengths first or offered the chance to nurture and develop their gifts and their talents, they'll never move beyond their challenges. Their strengths are what give them power, their power and their energy. Beverly Trail is another TUI expert in the field. And her quote, I thought, was really powerful. As twice exceptional learners excel in their areas of strength, they develop the resiliency they need to persevere through the struggles of overcoming their disabilities. And to me, that is the essence of twice exceptionality. They have to have that resiliency to persevere and to really thrive in their area of strength. They can't do it without overcoming and being supported with their disabilities. Now, don't get me wrong, it isn't so simple. You don't just have to nurture their strengths and voila, magical panacea. They get to do what they want to do in all of life and problem solved. No, these kids are really complex and they are at risk if their needs, full needs, aren't met. We can't just nurture their strengths. We just can't forget them. And we have to put them at the forefront. So how do we help? Well, the first thing is identification, and we can't really identify these kids without a comprehensive team of professionals. So what does that team look like? Yeah, it's a lot of people. So you really need the teachers, you need the school to be involved. Many times, if you can, a gifted specialist is helpful. However, that in and of itself is one of the major challenges with identifying these kids. So unlike special education, with gifted education, so with special education, there's a federal mandate to help to identify kids that have disabilities that are impacting their education. However, there is no federal mandate for gifted education. So it's really left to the states to decide as to whether or not they want to mandate something and provide guidelines for identification. And Massachusetts, unfortunately, is not one of those states that does mandate it, as far as I understand. So it's really left up to the districts within Massachusetts to decide whether or not they want to have a budgetary item that supports kids who are gifted or not. But there can be a special educator. There definitely needs to be a mental health professional involved. A neuropsychologist is always super helpful. A pediatrician to be involved. Sometimes, depending on the disability, a psychiatrist might need to be involved. Certainly with other types of disabilities, other allied health professionals can be involved, like a visual specialist, a speech pathologist, an occupational therapist, to name a few. And then again, depending on what the disability is, there may be other types of physicians, specialists who are involved in a team approach. And not all of these members are going to be involved at all points in time with the family and with the child, but certainly they will be involved either ancillary ways or one-time ways, but certainly the teachers and mental health professionals, coaches, the parent and the child are all critical pieces of that team. And so this comprehensive team of professionals has to work together to develop and implement a plan that's also comprehensive and meets all of those academic, cognitive, and social emotional needs of the child. It has to be duly differentiated, so it has to work on supporting the strengths and supporting the challenges, and it has to be based on a whole child approach. So what might this comprehensive, dually differentiated whole child plan look like? Well, I present to you Courtney's barstool model for 2E growth and success. So I created this barstool model based on all of the reading that I did about the different components that are required in order to really help a 2E child be successful, all of the different component parts. And it might look complex, but these kids are complex. And many times they have been seen for their, unseen for their strengths and had a life full of challenge, frustration, confusion. And so this plan addresses all of those aspects. And it contains all of the parts that the 2E experts suggest are required. So it involves creating safe and trusting relationships, promoting and strengthening interpersonal skills. I've mentioned before, nurturing their strengths, interests, and talents, supporting their disabilities, and then fostering and strengthening interpersonal skills. And if you think back to the slides where we talked about what their strengths are and what all of those challenges are, many of those social emotional challenges that were listed are related to intrapersonal skills and interpersonal skills, in addition to the disabilities that need and lagging skills that they have. So, sad part about these kids, and my journey is living proof of this, and continues to be proof of this, is that if one part of this stool is missing, it'll fall. Frustration continues to set in, and the rebuilding will just be on a continual cycle. It's not to say that the whole stool will fall. You can get down to the safe and trusting relationships piece. You can have some strengths be developed. You can have a level of acceptance that the child can have themselves about who they are, and they can know themselves well enough. So you can have parts of the stool be put together, but without all of the component parts being put together for a significant amount of time, I firmly believe that there's no way to get to that top level of growth and success. It really takes a team effort, and it takes persistence and patience and resilience, and a lot of effort on the part of the child too. So I will describe, I should say, each of the components to you, but in full disclaimer, the tools required to build and keep this bar stool well maintained are somewhat beyond the scope of this presentation, but also a little bit right now at the stage in my coaching career, beyond my abilities and knowledge level. That's the next step, right? But my guess is that many of you have a lot of the tools in place and will know what tools to use when you're able to recognize a twice exceptional kid. And the key piece to remember is that these kids need the dual differentiation for the giftedness and the special education along and the challenges along with that social emotional support. So with that disclaimer in mind, we can start building. So one of the first pieces that's required in this stool is to create safe and trusting relationships among all that involved. And the primary place that I think is the most important place to start is with the parents, the family members, and the child. Is that with the mom chatter many times is where a lot of the initial challenges for these kids begin. It goes without saying, you know that safety and trusting relationships are what you work to establish first and foremost with your clients. But I think it's important to remember and recognize, especially within the context of the relationship of the family and the parent-child dynamic, especially in the teenage population. These kids need to be heard, they need to feel accepted, and they need to feel that they matter. So another component of the stool is the intrapersonal skills. So this is where the resilience comes in, acceptance of who they are, and being able to understand that they both have strengths and that they both have challenges. Many times these kids need to understand that they are perfectionists, but that doesn't have to stop them, that they can work through that challenge of perfectionism and understand that making mistakes is a part of learning. Many times they need support in their executive function skills. Many gifted kids come with, inherent to their giftedness is having organizational executive function skill challenges. To help them develop goal setting so that they can have that, and they can have that metacognition, and they can see in the future, and kind of have that nonverbal working memory developed, and understand how to get from here to there. Another component, and I've kind of talked endlessly about this, but this is actually one of the keystones, I think, if the Barstool would have a keystone beyond the safety and trusting relationships, is nurturing their strengths. Teaching to their intellectual readiness, so they're not just seen for their disability, but really they are allowed to thrive in whatever area it is that happens to be their strength. Helping the parents or the child, but many times the parents, connect with gifted organizations as a way to give them power. And a lot of times they might have suggestions as to how to develop and nurture those strengths. MAGE is the Massachusetts Association for Gifted Education. NAGC is the National Association for Gifted Children. TECA is a Twice Exceptional specific association. I've mentioned Bridges before, and they have a fantastic website full of information, and they have their research center out there. I think it's called the 2E Center. I have a list of resources at the end of this presentation, and it will have all of those websites listed. A lot of times this nurturing and developing strengths can mean a mentorship. It can mean an internship, and really just providing something that's relevant and meaningful to them that allows them to express their strength and talent. It could be playing in a band at a level that's, instead of the elementary school band, maybe it's playing in the high school band because they're ready for that level of musicianship. And so another component is supporting their lagging skills, supporting their disabilities, their academic challenges. And really, this is a place where they require explicit instruction to support their skill development. And there are multiple approaches that can be taken here. Get ready, do done is one of those for executive function skills, the whole brain approach, certainly helping them understand the importance of exercise, rest, and nutrition, connecting them, or the families, the parents, with organizations specific to that disability, because I think that's one thing that is, we as executive function coaches sometimes remembering to plug into like CHAD or whatnot for ADHD, but we have to remember that in twice exceptional kids, it could be dyslexia. It could be, it's not just going to be a disability that's specific to executive function. There could be other types of supports that are needed, and plugging into those organizations to help them with disability specific strategies can also be important. And then making sure they're taking medications if that's a part of their overall treatment plan and program. And so then the next component is the interpersonal skills. So kind of put this at the top just because felt like a bit like the icing on the cake, but it's an important piece nevertheless. A lot of the work in the other components is done with the student themselves, but the interpersonal skills are just as important because these kids need peers. These kids need to interact. They're human beings. They're going to be in relationship with other people. And so helping them to understand how to relate to and interact with other human beings in their lives, whether they be adults or peers, is incredibly important. But many times they come without the ability to read social cues, to see nonverbal communication, to understand how to take someone else's perspective. Many times they might be the leader of the group, but they don't know how to listen necessarily as well. And if they don't get to do what they want to do within the context of the group, they might have challenges. So learning how to do that And then another really critical one is learning how to ask for help in relation with another person. So again, just supporting their social skills in this way. In addition, especially as kids are ready to launch into adulthood, or even in high school, middle school ages, just learning, once they know about themselves, learning how to advocate for themselves, on behalf of themselves, to others is an important skill for them to learn and to take into the world with them. And so if the stool can be built and they can experience this growth and success, it can really be a powerful moment for them. And along the way, there's a lot to celebrate in terms of just many moments of success. But I think that if the effort and the identification can take place and the journey can begin wherever it begins, at whatever age it begins, and if it needs to begin over and over again, if that team can be put in place after, their strengths, their challenges identified, everything nurtured, developed, facilitated, right? These 2E students really have so much to offer that they can change the world. And who knows, maybe one of us might be working with and helping a 2E person who will contribute to society in a major way, like these guys have. But even if they don't become famous, these kids deserve the chance to become the truly exceptional kids that they are. And if we can uncover and understand their strengths while identifying and supporting their disabilities and social skills, people who are 2E will start to believe that they are truly exceptional. They'll believe in their worth, they'll understand their gifts, they'll be supported or seek support for their challenges. And they themselves will discover what amazing and interesting people they are. And hopefully they'll begin to harness that power of their gifts to create, to invent, to imagine, to discover, and to change the world. And I hope that this presentation will in some way contribute to that success. This is my little 2E guy who's not so little anymore. He just had his last day of high school today, and he graduates next Saturday. And this was the roller coaster he built in a project in the gifted program that he was in when he was 7. Mm-hmm. And those are the resources that I suggest you can consult with. And these were the references for my presentation. So thank you very much.
Courtney, do I have your consent to record this? I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, that's fine.
I am recording it.
But I want my own copy, David.
You can, Matt. I'm just letting you know.
Cool.